Which position does your favorite team need to address the most entering the 2024 NFL offseason? What's going on, football fans? It's Mitch here, back of the Bottom Line View, here to give you the biggest need for every single AFC team entering the 2024 offseason. This is my opinion, my analysis on the biggest must-address position for each and every AFC team. All 16 of them. If that sounds good, don't forget to spike the like button. Subscribe if you haven't already for NFL offseason news, analysis, free agency predictions, free agency breaking news and coverage, draft, all that and more on the Bottom Line View. Hop in the comment section. Let me know your opinion for the biggest need of your favorite football team. Check out the NFC video if you haven't already. I addressed all 16 NFC teams in that video. Now it's time for the AFC, and let's waste no more time, beginning with the number one seed in the AFC. That was the Baltimore Ravens. It just so happens that they're also the number one team in alphabetical order. The Ravens might have a low-key big need this offseason, and that is addressing the front seven, because the Ravens, I felt, before last year, had a big need at the edge position. And it just so happens that they went out and they added two veteran edge players in August that ended up being really good for them. Jadeveon Clowney, Kyle Van Noy. And they started many of their snaps. But here's the thing. Not only is Kyle Van Noy and Jadeveon Clowney both free agents again after 1 year stints with the team, but also Mike Macdonald is gone. The brilliant young defensive coordinator is now the Seahawks head coach. So the ability to prop up maybe lesser talents to get career years out of guys that you got off the street in August, that's probably not going to happen anymore, right? At least you would think so. And then you also have the most talented defensive lineman on your football team as a free agent, Justin Madubuike. Then you have a key underrated defensive lineman, run stuffer, and Brent Urban. Then you have a young former first-round pick, Patrick Queen, at linebacker, and the Ravens' identity of their defense was that middle-of-the-field defense. Madubuike at D-tackle, the two linebackers, Roquan and Queen, in the middle, Kyle Hamilton, Geno Stone, Marcus Williams at the safety positions. That was what this defense was, just brilliant in the middle of the field. And now they're going to have to address all those different spots, probably spend quite a bit of cash and moolah to bring back Madubuike. And I think they're going to have to get a little bit younger on the edge. I mean, David Ajabo, maybe they hope that he's ready away. He's dealt with some injuries, but he hasn't really panned out as a pure pass rusher the way that you would like. He's really athletic, though. They still have Tyus Bowser, I believe, on the roster. So there's still some depth there, but I mean, those two guys on the edge were just miracle workers for them, and Macdonald was a miracle worker in his scheme. So I think the front seven, getting younger on the edge, getting better on the edge, finding maybe a dynamic pass rusher, seeing who you can keep, probably want to keep Madubuike the most. You might be able to let Patrick Queen walk, but then it's not going to be easy to find a replacement for him, in my opinion. So the front seven just has a lot of questions. And then you also have to think about, well, Geno Stone's a free agent. You've got both your guards are free agents. So there's definitely a lot of different positions the Ravens need to address. They don't have a running back, really. I mean, J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards are both free agents. So they're going to have to really pick their spots. I believe, though, personally, if they want to carry over their success and have the best shot of really being a contender again in 2024 and maintaining their status in the AFC, they're going to have to spend money on defense. They're going to have to probably spend money on their front seven, because I just don't think you're going to be able to just count on scheming pressure the way that you did this past season because McDonald is now gone. You're going to have to put a little bit more money and resources into edge and into pass rusher. So front seven is the Ravens' biggest need. Next up, the Buffalo Bills. We start off with two extremely fascinating teams. And I think a lot of people would argue that the Bills really don't have a huge need on offense on the surface. Because when you look at their roster, you pull up our lads and you look at the depth chart, you say, well, you know, nobody's really leaving. And they actually have like their full starting offense coming back outside of Gabe Davis. And maybe by the end of the year, Gabe Davis didn't even play in the playoffs. So, like, is he even a starting player? Like, they really have everybody back. So, they don't need anything, right? And people might point to, well, they have a ton of players that are free agents on the defensive line. Daquan Jones, Leonard Floyd, AJ Epinesa, Tim Settle, Jordan Phillips, Shaq Lawson, Linval Joseph, Poona Ford. All these guys are free agents because they were all one-year contracts not long ago, right? But that's just what the Bills do. They still have Ed Oliver, they still have Greg Rousseau, and hopefully they're hoping that Von Miller can up his game next year, or they're going to have to make a move with his contract. But this is a team that loves one-year contracts on the defensive line. They're very good at finding veteran defensive linemen that fit their system and fit their scheme well. And with the secondary likely getting healthier, with Matt Milano coming back at linebacker, they can maybe afford to keep it cheap on the defensive line, supporting Ed Oliver, supporting Greg Rousseau. But the biggest and best way for the Bills to really improve is wide receiver. If they want to win the Super Bowl, getting Josh Allen another receiver is the best way to go. And maybe the best way to do that is actually by trading Stephon Diggs, getting a first-round pick, or getting a first-round pick next year, getting rid of the cash, spending some of that cash elsewhere, right? Making maybe a post-June trade or something like that. And I understand that's post-draft. But the Bills might have to think about their future. They might have to think about what's best for their franchise, for their ability to contend. I know that they want to win the Super Bowl in 2024, but they also have to think about what's best for 2025, 2026, 2027. And honestly, like, is Diggs still in your plans long term? He feels like a guy that's regressing a little bit. Do they maybe keep Diggs this year? Maybe one more year, get rid of him next year, and get a young receiver in there in the first round and make him a number 2 to Diggs? Maybe they could go that direction. They did spend a first round pick on Dalton Kincaid last year. But in my opinion, in order to beat Kansas City, in order to beat Cincinnati, in order to beat these teams in the AFC in the playoffs, Allen needs more weaponry. He can't be carrying the team with his legs, with his arm, doing it all, with limited weapons around him. It just doesn't work, especially when the defense doesn't show up. So they need more around Allen, and I believe the best way to get this team to the next level is by giving him another receiver. The third team is the Cincinnati Bengals, and this one was tricky because I think you could make an argument for a bunch of different positions. Obviously, they need to address wide receiver in terms of, are they keeping T. Higgins? Are they not keeping T. Higgins? Once we get that answer, we will further understand how big of a need that is. Honestly, I think they're probably going to let Tyler Boyd walk unless T. Higgins walks, in which case they might keep Tyler Boyd just for the security blanket and the familiarity of him and Joe Burrow. That being said, I think the biggest need, almost regardless, is right tackle. Jonah Williams is a free agent. Right tackle is a big need. Offensive line, protecting Joe Burrow, especially post-injury, is a big need. Every time this team has lost, the reason they have lost in the past couple of years has been offensive line. The inability to block Aaron Donald in the Super Bowl. The inability to block Chris Jones in the AFC Championship in 2022. Right? And maybe some of you might say, well, that's interior, Mitch. Well, fair enough. Offensive line as a whole then. Left guard, right tackle. Those would be the two positions I'd look to spend on if I'm the Bengals. I'd look to pick a draft pick, first rounder. Offensive line. Protect Joe Burrow. Get a run game established. They're going to have to make a decision on Joe Mixon potentially as well. Alternatively, defensively, I would say safety is a huge need for them. They desperately missed Jesse Bates last year. That completely changed their defense. And when DJ Reader, who is now a free agent, wasn't on the field, their run defense was in shambles. So defensive tackle, safety, right tackle are positions that I think are desperate for them. But if I had to pick just one, I would say focusing on the core of your team, protect Joe Burrow, and good things will happen. So right tackle is the biggest need, in my opinion. Next, the Cleveland Browns. The Browns actually don't have a lot of needs this offseason. Their entire offense is back. Like, literally every single one of their starters is back. And that includes guys that got injured, right? They had injuries on the offensive line to their tackles. They had injuries to Nick Chubb, arguably their best offensive player. Not even arguable. I actually think Elijah Moore, Cedric Tillman, and Amari Cooper is a pretty nice receiving core to go along with a really talented tight end in David Njoku. Jerome Ford as a backup running back to Nick Chubb is promising. It really comes down to, can Deshaun Watson get this thing together? Honestly, I don't think he can, but the offense is on paper really, really talented. Jack Conklin comes back. So the biggest need for me for the Browns is really defensive line, and that's because Zadarius Smith is a free agent, and Shelby Harris is a free agent. Jordan Elliott is a free agent. So they have many players that played in their rotation for their best defensive line in years, and those guys are free agents. So 2 of their 4 starting defensive linemen are free agents. They're going to have to address those spots. I would expect Zadarius Smith to come back. I thought he was pretty good for them, but I don't know. We'll see. It's interesting. Shelby Harris is a veteran who's pretty replaceable. They still have the 2 core players of Dalvin Tomlinson and Myles Garrett in the mix. Linebacker would be another position I would think about. JOK played pretty well for them, but other than that, they don't really have one. You know, Anthony Walker's been solid when he's been on the field for the Browns. Maybe they bring him back on a 1-year deal to solidify that top 2 linebacker duo there. But otherwise, like, they're good at corner. They've got depth at corner mostly. Safeties with Delpit and Thornhill are solid. Maybe they need some depth behind that. McLeod is a free agent. He got hurt late last year. So linebacker, defensive line, front 7 in general would be kind of the need for the Browns. Just replenishing some of the 1-year contract veteran players. Maybe getting younger at certain positions like the edge or defensive tackle position. Right? Even Dalvin Tomlinson's getting a little bit older. So, yeah, especially complementing Myles Garrett, you want to find talented defensive linemen that can thrive opposite him. So, defensive line for the Browns. Next up, the Denver Broncos. The Broncos, without question, their number 1 need, despite having many needs. I think this roster is a lot more, kind of in dire straits than people think. I think they need really linebackers, edge rushers. They need wide receiver. They need center. They need tight end, maybe. I don't know. Maybe they like Dulcich. I don't know. They don't have a lot of elite players in the front 7. They arguably don't even have a single one. Zach Allen might be the closest thing. DJ Jones is pretty good. They did get some good production out of some younger pass rushers, but nothing special. So the front 7 is definitely a huge need for them. Just finding a difference maker that can really win one-on-ones, get to the quarterback, be a dangerous edge rusher, or be a dangerous rusher in general. But the biggest need for them is quarterback. I mean, Russell Wilson is going to be gone. They're going to make that decision. He's going to be gone. Jared Stidham is then projected to be their starter. So I don't think that's going to be the case. Do they go out and do they make a trade? Do they try to go spend on Kirk Cousins? Do they try to make a trade for Justin Fields or Mac Jones? Or even Zach Wilson? I don't know. Do they sign like a veteran, maybe like a Tannehill or a Gardner Minshew or a Baker Mayfield? Or do they try to trade up for a quarterback? Or do they sit where they're at and pick the 4th best quarterback in the draft because you'd assume the 3 best would be gone by then? I kind of see the Broncos being aggressive and moving up in the draft and trying to pick one of the top quarterbacks if they can do it. and probably partnering that with Stidham and maybe another veteran quarterback. I wouldn't be shocked if this team traded for Mac Jones. I brought that up on Bleacher Report. I think that's a good fit for Mac Jones with Sean Payton. So that's something to think about. But the quarterback position, nothing's going to matter for the Broncos if they don't figure that position out soon. And this team, in my opinion, I think fans are maybe going to be a little bit antsy because Sean Payton, everything was promised with him, right? Like to get back to the playoffs, to be a winning team, to be successful. They were a little bit better last year. It was respectable last year. I think clearly the fan base knows that Russell isn't the same guy anymore. I think that's understandable. I think they've got to take it slow. I don't think they could just force it. So maybe it doesn't even happen this year, but clearly the biggest need is quarterback. Broncos, quarterback. Next, we got the Houston Texans. This one is a little bit more like a specific thing. I don't think it's really like an area of the team. They do have a couple free agents that are defensive linemen. We're talking about Jerry Hughes, Sheldon Rankins, Jonathan Greenard, Derek Barnett. All players that are productive. Even Tart by the end of the year, once he got released by Tennessee and picked up by Houston, he was pretty productive. The linebacker position has Denzel Perryman, Blake Cashman, Neville Hewitt, all free agents for this team. Cashman and Perryman were pretty consistent for them as well. So all those guys are going to have to be determined whether they bring them back or not. But personally, I think the biggest need is just like a defensive difference maker. I think Houston's done a really good job. Nick Caserio's done a really good job of finding a bunch of veterans on 1-year, 2-year contracts the last couple of years and just placing them in spots and trying to find gems and trying to find undervalued veterans that can be contributors to this football team. But in my opinion, if they could just add, like, let's say they don't re-sign Jerry Hughes, they don't re-sign Sheldon Rankins, and they don't re-sign Jonathan Greenard. Let's just say that. But they add Chris Jones, right? Like, that, I think, is something they need. They just need, like, a big-time baller. Or they go and they trade for Jonathan Allen. They have a ton of money. They can do this. They have enough draft picks to make this happen. There's free agents that you can go out and get. Big-time players. Even like a Leonard Williams. Even that type of player. Like, can you go out and get that type of guy? Where it's just, offense has got to respect him a little bit more. He can be a little bit more of a game changer. Or maybe it's not even a defensive lineman, although I would prefer it to be defensive lineman because DeMeco Ryans thrives. His scheme thrives on defensive linemen. Like, he comes from San Francisco. Remember, San Francisco is the team that most heavily, other than maybe the Eagles, spends on defensive linemen. First-round picks. Free agents. So the Texans, I would say difference-making defensive lineman, edge or interior, doesn't matter. But after that, you could also think about maybe a cornerback as well, like to go opposite Derek Stingley. Right now, Steven Nelson is a free agent, as well as Thomas is a free agent. So a couple of guys that played a lot of snaps for them last season. Got to think about replacing those guys. So the Texans, I would say just defensive X factor, defensive game changer. Next, the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts, pretty obviously, although they could upgrade a couple spots, like Grover Stewart's a free agent. Will they bring him back? I would think so. Would you like to have a better wide receiver too? Maybe. Would you like to have, I don't know, like a better right guard or something? Yeah, potentially. But secondary. I mean, it's obviously secondary, right? They drafted Juju Brents in the second round last year, who they seem to like. I think Nick Cross is a decent player. Kenny Moore is a free agent. Julian Blackmon's a free agent. Those are two of the better Colts secondary players over the past 3 to 4 years, especially Kenny Moore. So that's a key free agent for them. He's a little bit older, though, so I wonder if they'll bring him back or not, or let him go somewhere else. Typically, the Colts don't like to re-sign older players. That's just been their thing under Ballard. But I think they're fine in the front seven. I don't think they're like dynamic or anything. They're not as good as maybe they were a couple years ago at linebacker or even the defensive line. DeForest Buckner's still a baller. Kwity Paye's a good player. Samson Ebukem's a good player. Like, they've got good players. I like EJ Speed. I like Zaire Franklin. I think they're solid, but like they don't have like an amazing defensive front, but it's good enough. I really think just solidifying the secondary, finding a good corner on the opposite side of Juju Brents, figuring out who your nickel is going to be, figuring out that safety position. I just think the secondary, whether that's through the draft, through free agency, I think you could do a little bit of both. There's contributors everywhere at safety that you can look in free agency. Maybe go safety in free agency, corner in the draft. That's definitely a possibility. But the Colts just need better cover men. If they're going to contend against Houston and CJ Stroud, if they're going to contend against Trevor Lawrence in Jacksonville, if they're going to contend with Herbert, Mahomes, Burrow, Lamar, Allen, and they want to get there, they're going to have to cover some people. So the Colts need cover men in the secondary. Next, the Jacksonville Jags. I think there are needs for Jacksonville on both sides of the football. Pass rusher is one of them, especially if they don't re-sign Josh Allen, although I expect them to. It feels like a lot of their starting defense will actually be back next year, which is awesome. But I think they could really upgrade the opposite edge rusher of Josh Allen because honestly, like the first round pick Trayvon Walker hasn't exactly been that type of guy. I'd also look for them to maybe try to upgrade the nickelback position where it feels like they just always get picked on. I'd also like to see them upgrade, a wide receiver position that looks like Calvin Ridley's going to be gone. So it's really Christian Kirk coming off a major injury and Zay Jones and Parker Washington. So wide receiver is going to be key for them. They still have Evan Ingram at tight end, but above all else, it's offensive line. Like, offensive line needs to be better. They couldn't run the ball at all last year. I'm a fan of Travis Etienne, but it's clear that the offensive line just couldn't open up any holes or spring big runs at all or any consistency in the power game. And then they really struggled to protect Trevor Lawrence, and that's what got him injured at the end of the day. Trevor Lawrence isn't one of those guys that's a super quick processor. He kind of needs a little bit of time to operate. He is best, most effective in a deep passing game and an intermediate passing game. So providing him time is crucial. So I think the offensive line is massive. They did spend a lot of resources, right? Cam Robinson at left tackle, right tackle Antoine Harrison. They spent a first-round pick. Brandon Scherf is older. He's not the same player. Maybe they can move on from him. Left guard is a clear deficiency. Center has been a clear deficiency. So especially the interior, understanding that they've spent a lot of capital on the tackle position, interior offensive line to me is absolutely critical to get that right. Helps your running game, helps protect the middle of the pocket for Trevor Lawrence, for him to step up and manipulate the pocket. He's a good pocket manipulator as well. Pocket presence is really strong with him. So allowing him to step up and move and make those plays within the pocket. Doug Peterson, I've often criticized him a little bit for not having enough physicality in his offenses, being a little bit too pass heavy. So getting a talented offensive line like he did in 2017 when he led the Eagles to a Super Bowl, that's the engine of that team back then. Even though he wanted to be pass heavy, they were just so good on the offensive line. So building that offensive line has to be first and foremost for Jacksonville. Next, the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs, they don't have like multiple areas where it's key needs. I think there's 2 to 3 critical areas. First, I think left tackle. Jawan Taylor, they signed up long-term. He wasn't very good for them at right tackle, but he signed up long-term, so nothing you can do there. The rest of the offensive line is good. It's left tackle. Is Donovan Smith going to be back? Are they going to try to draft a younger guy? Or are they going to maybe develop somebody? Like Morris was a third-round pick last year. Maybe they think he can slide in right away, and that's fair enough. But then you need to replenish the depth behind him as well. Maybe bring in a veteran on top of seeing what Morris can have in his second season. Wide receiver, everyone's going to talk about. They need a number 1 receiver if they want to three-peat, in my opinion. They're not going to get by with Mecole Hardman, Valdez Scantling, Justin Watson, older Travis Kelce, and second-year Rashee Rice. They're not going to get away with that. So wide receiver is a clear need. But if I actually had to say anything about this football team, it would be defensive line. And it's because when you look at their depth chart, the only returning starting defensive lineman is George Karlaftis. That's it. If you include Charles Omenihu, who split a lot of time with Mike Dana, then maybe there's 2 starting defensive linemen. But Mike Dana is a free agent. Derek Nandi and Tershawn Wharton, both big run stuffers, are free agents. Chris Jones is a free agent. So if you lose Chris Jones, I mean, that is a huge, massive loss and irreplaceable. But that just makes defensive line like absolutely critical that you replenish that. If you even lose Mike Dana and you lose Derek Nandi, well, then you're looking for a run stuffer and you're looking for a situational edge that can rush the quarterback, that can play multiple roles. And then you're talking about, well, we also have Drew Tranquill, who's a free agent. He's like a hybrid defensive end linebacker, does everything. L'Jarius Sneed is a free agent in the secondary, although I think he's more replaceable than Chris Jones or like some of these defensive linemen, like because there's so many of them. So to me, the biggest need for the Chiefs is figuring out what their defensive front is going to be, because the reason they won the Super Bowl this year is their defense. You know, don't get it twisted. So without that defensive line, they're not going to be able to do it again. So I think draft, free agency, defensive line will be front and center. Everyone is going to go to the wide receiver headlines, but I'm intrigued to see what the Chiefs actually prioritize in free agency. I think they'll try to get a receiver, but they won't do it if they haven't figured out the defensive line first. Next, the Las Vegas the Raiders are next. And honestly, this football team needs a quarterback. Like, Aiden O'Connell is not the guy to me. He's just too limited from a mobility standpoint. I think he's got a good arm. I think he's pretty accurate. I like a lot of what he brought. He's a big guy. He's tough. Seems like a good guy. And maybe he's a transitional quarterback or a bridge quarterback, to use the key term. But to me, like, they need a quarterback. They need a difference maker at that position. Jimmy Garoppolo wasn't that guy. Derek Carr wasn't that guy. They need to try to go for a quarterback. Now, that being said, they could also use some help on the right side of the offensive line. They have Miller and Parham at left tackle and left guard, but center, right guard, and right tackle are all free agents, including some of the depth players that they have. So Andre James is a free agent. Jermaine Illuminor, who's been pretty good for them, is a free agent. And Greg Van Roten's also a free agent. All 3 of them started last year. So offensive line, huge, but quarterback, figuring out who that's going to be in the future. Josh Jacobs is also a free agent, but he's more replaceable. I think Zamir White can at least carry the load for this football team. Defensive tackle, defensively, is a big need. John Jenkins and Bilal Nichols are both free agents. Adam Butler, who had a nice season for them, also is a free agent. But I think they're hoping Tyree Wilson, the other edge, can really develop and give them something potent on the opposite side of Max Crosby. If not, Malcolm Kuntz kind of came into his own last year. But I think they made a lot of savvy pickups last season, especially in the secondary and at the linebacker level. So I think they're fine there, especially if Jack Jones can get his head on straight. They're going to be fine at corner with Hobbs and Jones. But I think D-tackle on defense, especially quarterback on offense, offensive line. But I think they should focus on who their quarterback is and protecting that quarterback. And it's pretty simple. From there, you can be a pretty competent team, and your defense has good coaching. Max Crosby can be the engine of that unit. And if you can protect the quarterback and have a quarterback that can get the ball to Devontae Adams, get the ball to Jacoby Myers, you should be fine. So the Raiders need a quarterback. Big time. Next, the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers, I think when I think about the Chargers and I think about what Harbaugh wants to be this Charger team to be, I think it's a physical team. And the first thing I thought of was like offensive line. But then when I really got into the nitty gritty, the offensive line is pretty much all back next year. And in my opinion, the offensive line of the Chargers was not amazing, but it's not like horrific, right? Justin Herbert's a great quarterback. He can make it work, right? He can kind of overcome a little bit of deficiency at right tackle or right guard. It's not a big deal. So you've got enough there, especially considering they've spent money on Corey Linsley at center, first-round picks on left tackle and left guard as of late. So they don't really need to worry about offensive line, in my opinion, as a forefront need. Eckler's a free agent and Everett are free agents at tight end and running back. So playmaker is a need to some degree, but Mike Williams should be back along with Keenan Allen, Josh Palmer. I like that trio of receivers for them. I'd like to see them add a speed threat, although they tried that with Quentin Johnson. You just got to hope that he develops a little bit better. Running back, they could draft somebody, honestly. That's not a huge need. Tight end, I don't think it's a huge need. To me, the biggest need for the Chargers is the defense, and it's defensive line. When I think of the 49ers under Harbaugh, they had a really good defensive front. They had, obviously, Bowman and Willis in the middle at linebacker. They had Justin Smith and Aldon Smith. Those guys were awesome. And then they had a bunch of kind of underrated type of players. And you look at this defensive front, I like Morgan Fox. I think that Joey Bosa, we'll see what happens there. Khalil Mack, we'll see what happens there. But they can play when they're healthy. Mack had an amazing season last year. They do have some younger players that they might like. They did have a second-round pick at the edge position last year. But defensive line, especially the interior, is very undermanned. Nick Williams and Austin Johnson are both free agents, and those were two of their starting 3 interior defensive linemen. And the linebacker position has been dreadful. Although I do like Henley, the second-year linebacker that they drafted in the 3rd round. I would expect him to get more snaps next year. Eric Kendricks is still on the books next year. We'll see if he stays around. But I would say defensive line. Getting a pass rush, being able to stop the run, getting a little bit beefier in the interior. I think that will be the biggest area of concern for Harbaugh, and I think that's where they'll address first. Defensive front. Charger fans, get ready to actually stop the run next year. Next, the Miami Dolphins. The Dolphins, I think they do have a lot of free agents. Some key, right? Davis and Wilkins on the interior defensive line, probably their 2 best defensive linemen on the inside. Zach Sealer is still there, but Davis and Wilkins are those big monsters in the middle that allow them to stop the run at a high rate. They really have very limited depth at that position as well. So they've got to figure out what they're going to do. So defensive line is certainly a need. But, other than that, defensively, it's a lot of depth players like Andrew Van Ginkel, who is really, really good for them. I'd honestly expect him to depart just because he was so good. Someone else is probably going to sign him. But the offensive line is still the biggest need. Robert Hunt, probably their best, most consistent and available offensive lineman, is a free agent at right guard. He's a really good player. 2nd-round pick in 2020. They need to re-sign him at right guard. Isaiah Wynn, Connor Williams are both free agents. Teron Armstead's always injured, so you've got to account for that as well. And Austin Jackson just sucks at right tackle. So they need to figure out the offensive line. Whether that's draft or free agency, they need to be able to protect Tua. They need to be able to actually have some power in their running game. Their whole running game last year was horizontal, and teams figured it out. They had no power. They couldn't run at people because they had no push up front. And stop signing guys that are always hurt. Stop signing Isaiah Wynn. Stop signing Teron Armstead. Stop signing these guys that always get hurt. Austin Jackson. Go out there and get some solid, available, veteran offensive linemen that actually have a track record of staying on the football field. Bring some power, bring some toughness. I understand this is mostly a zone running scheme, but look at the Niners, right? The Niners, that's where McDaniel came from. That offensive line has some push, has some beef, has some power to it, along with the versatility to move. Not just an offensive line that's completely horizontal. You need more toughness, more physicality. If the Dolphins want to be able to win on the road and go to Buffalo and go to Kansas City and go to Cincinnati in the playoffs and win, they're going to have to get physical, tough. And that starts with an offensive line that can move people. Next, the New England Patriots. I know you guys were all waiting for this one. You probably just clicked on the chapter. Let me know in the comment section below, actually, if you just did that. You went to the chapter and you clicked the Patriots. Please let me know. Guys, I'm just going to be simple with this one. I could really pick a bunch of different positions on offense, but I'm just going to say offense. I'm not going to go crazy here. I'm not going to try to pinpoint quarterback. I'm not going to try to pinpoint receiver or tackle. They're all crucial. You need them all to win in the NFL. You need them all to score points in the NFL, guys. So yes, you need an offensive line, a tackle position to protect your young quarterback or your quarterback in general. You need a tight end that can make plays. You need a receiver that can actually demand a double team. You need a receiver that can separate. The Patriots have none of these things. Hunter Henry is a free agent. He was one of their best offensive players last year. He is a free agent at tight end. Their best offensive lineman, Mike Onwenu, is a free agent. Trent Brown is a free agent. So tackle is going to be at the top of the list. It doesn't feel like this team is going to go with Mac Jones again, and I don't blame them. So they need a quarterback. And wide receiver, outside of Demario Douglas, I don't love this depth chart. Devontae Parker is overpaid, can't separate. All he is a jump ball special. Juju Smith-Schuster is garbage, has no knees. And honestly, I'd try to cut both if I could, or trade Juju back to the Chiefs if I could. But damn, try to get out of that Parker contract. And then I'd try to re-sign Kendrick Bourne, hopefully for a bit cheaper than you would have thought because he got injured and he's getting a little bit older. But I'd like to have Kendrick Bourne back. He was having his best season of his career last year, and I think he's super underrated. Demario Douglas I like, but they need a number one receiver. So go out there, spend some money in free agency on a receiver, potentially draft a quarterback, or if you don't like that option at quarterback, trade back, get more assets, draft a tackle. Right? I think they can re-sign Mike Onwenu. I would love them to re-sign Mike Onwenu, and the reason is not only because he can play right tackle, but he can also play guard. So there's great versatility to have a guy that can be elite at both positions, and you can just formulate your best five out of whatever group of offensive linemen you offer on a given week. So yes, left tackle is going to be big. But they also need right tackle. They also need receiver. They also need quarterback. So offense. Spend all your money, all your assets, all your draft picks on offense. I'd be fine with having Pharaoh Brown as our tight end. I don't even care. Everybody else, spend money on receiver, spend money on tackle, spend capital on the offense, Patriots. Come on, baby. The New York Jets. Offensive line. I don't need to say anything else. Offensive line. If you actually want to see whether or not Aaron Rodgers will be good in New York, you need to protect Aaron Rodgers. You need to be able to have the guy upright and not tear his Achilles on the second play of the game in the NFL season. Okay? You need to be able to protect Aaron Rodgers. Center. Connor McGovern is a free agent. A problem. Left tackle, Mekhi Becton and Dwayne Brown and Billy Turner, all free agents. You need a left tackle. That's likely going to be an area that they try to address in the draft and free agency. David Bakhtiari, I guarantee you they're going to try to go after him. Connor McGovern, center. I think Tippmann was initially a center in the draft, so maybe they moved Tippmann to center and they draft a guard, or I'm not exactly sure. Elijah Vera Tucker might play right tackle. They need to get more productivity out of Laken Tomlinson. After the offensive line, they need a number two receiver. Like, this is the saddest group of number two receivers. Alan Lazard is slower than me. I don't even know who Jason Brownlee is. Xavier Gibson, I just saw him show up against the Patriots one day. I was like, that guy's fine, I guess, but he doesn't even look like an NFL receiver. They need a number two receiver. And they need to protect Aaron Rodgers. Their defense will be fine, even if they lose a couple pieces. Jordan Whitehead, Chuck Clark, safeties are definitely somewhere where they have to look, but they'll be fine. They've got studs everywhere on defense. Protect Aaron Rodgers and get pass catchers that Aaron Rodgers can throw to. Period. End of story. Next, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Quarterback. The Pittsburgh Steelers need a quarterback. I can go through every position, and quite frankly, I'm looking at the depth chart right now. The Pittsburgh Steelers have a lot of players returning that were starters for them last year. And they don't have a lot of big names that are free agents. Mason Rudolph is actually a free agent. And other than that, I mean, Marcus Golden, I guess they'd like to have back as a rotation rusher. That's very small, though. Levi Wallace played quite a bit for them, but I don't even know if they want him back. Chandon Sullivan wasn't very good for them. They'd probably like to move on. So this Steeler team, they need a quarterback. And I think this is a good offseason where you look at their roster, they could spend money on a quarterback. Like Kirk Cousins, come on down. If there's an outside-the-box team for Kirk Cousins, I think it should be this team. As much as I like the idea of Justin Fields and Arthur Smith's offense for cheap and having that option for the 5th year, I would rather go after Kirk Cousins if I was the Steelers, if I was running the Steelers. Now, I would also look at Fields and a trade for Fields because I don't think that would be too expensive, and I think that would be a lot more manageable than Kirk Cousins. But this is a roster where if you put Kirk Cousins on it, this is a playoff team. This is a team that can do some damage in the playoffs. So, like, quarterback. Maybe they even look to trade up in the first round. Kenny Pickett, to me, that's going to be the question for Steelers fans. To me, the fact that Mason Rudolph was better than him last year, I think tells you all you need to know. Like, I liked Kenny Pickett in his draft class, but honestly, that was just a really bad draft class, and I was trying to pick anybody that I liked out of that group, but the fact that Mason Rudolph was more productive, the receivers were more responsive to him, the fan base enjoyed his play more than Kenny Pickett, that speaks volumes. They need a quarterback. They need a guy that can really make things happen. They need a quarterback they can rely on, not just a guy that's managing a game, trying to not turn it over or whatever. They need a quarterback. Could they use upgrades at linebacker? Could they use an upgrade at cornerback too? Yes. Could they use an upgrade at safety? Yes. But at least a lot of these players are coming back and they can just add layers of depth, or they could potentially move off of some veterans, save some money, spend on other veterans. There's a lot of alternatives for the Steelers, but quarterback above all else needs to be addressed. And the final team is the Tennessee Titans, and this is easy. Offensive line. You don't have to pull up our lads to tell you that one. The offensive line was the worst in the NFL last season. And if they want Will Levis to be successful, or any young quarterback for that matter, they need to be able to protect him. Derrick Henry's likely going to leave, so that means that, hey, you no longer have a superhuman running back that can make up for poor run blocking. So, I don't know. You need an offensive line. And I think for the Titans, they're in a position where they can see what Will Levis offers this year. They can build the offensive line this offseason. They have an excellent offensive line coach now in Callahan that comes from the Browns and joins his son as the head coach now from the Bengals. And they can build this offensive line, and they can figure out if Will Levis is the guy. And if he's not, they can look at quarterback next year or the year after, or look at free agency in the year after. But the defense is in fine enough shape. It's not horrific. Build the offensive line, protect your young quarterback, establish that ground game, see if Will Levis has got it. If he doesn't, we'll look at quarterback later. But quarterback isn't the immediate need for me. Receiver isn't the immediate need for me. Defense, it's offensive line, period. Those are the biggest needs for every single AFC team entering the 2024 NFL offseason. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to Gronk spike the like button. Don't forget to subscribe, guys. Make sure to tune in to all the offseason content on the BLV, and I will be just continuing to give you content. Thank you so much for your support. Love you all, and we'll see you soon. Peace.